In the name of God, the Almighty, good evening, everyone. The European Saudi Organization for Human Rights is holding its third annual conference to support the victims of violations, human rights violations by Saudi Arabia. This year, headlined Whitewashing and Manipulation, Saudi Tools to Cover Its Violations. I'm overwhelmed to be with you. I'm glad to be with you in this conference within the vast violations which are going on in Saudi Arabia. In addition to the increasing numbers of executions, Saudi Arabia has increased also the arbitrary judgments against the activists for practicing their legitimate rights within the torture in prisons, the mistreatment, and the many defects in the judicial system. Thank you for your time, for your efforts, and for your participation, for sharing your expertise, and thank you for the victims or their families who are also victims to participating with us in this conference, sharing their very painful story. We know it's also painful. This year, the conference is trying through sharing the testimonies and the expertise to give a clearer idea on the means which are used by Saudi Arabia to cover up its violations. During the past years, it spent millions of dollars to whitewash its violations. All of these attempts to whitewash and to brighten up its image doesn't draw the image of the Saudi Arabia. It also makes the stories of the victims forgettable and makes defending them harder and more difficult than faced by all the money spent and interest. Therefore, based upon these testimonies, we will try to come up with recommendations to support these victims, to defend them, and to prevent Saudi Arabia from succeeding its attempts. We shall see together a video on this subject, whitewashing and manipulation of the violations.
ونبدأ
Now we shall begin our conference with the speech of the European Saudi Organization for Human Rights with the head of the Documentation and Research Department at the organization, Mr. Juhaini, who shall speak about the Saudi methods in the United Nations to dim these violations. Thank you, Mr. Amin, and thanks for everyone and participants. In my name and the name of the European Saudi Organization, we thank you for your time, for your efforts, and sharing your expertise. I will try today to speak very briefly about how Saudi Arabia is using its own mechanisms in the United Nations to whitewash its image and cover up its violations and justify them. Upon our expertise, I will try to highlight how the Saudi government uses such mechanisms. After having neglected these mechanisms, we have noticed that the Saudi Arabia has changed the way it deals with these mechanisms. It started to using them in promoting its image and whitewashing. This came along with increasing numbers of arbitrary acts and with the various mechanisms of United Nations to improve the human rights. The Saudi Arabia have used these mechanisms in a manipulative way. I will try to highlight this very briefly and speak about these mechanisms and how they've been used by Saudi Arabia. First of all, through the correspondence and the special rapporteurs. During the recent years, Saudi Arabia has changed the way it deals with these special messages or recommendations sent to them by the rapporteurs, which are complaints related to victims of violations. And instead of neglecting these messages completely, it started responding back to these messages within the specified duration. It's trying through these responses to appear as if it's cooperating and to justify these violations. But the way we read these responses, that Saudi Arabia is only neglecting and saying we are not violating, we are only applying the laws to protect the individuals. The complaints and also some of these information. There are complaints which include torture, mistreatment, and Saudi Arabia only neglects that they didn't do this. The responses actually is a proof that there is no serious investigation on this. And therefore, most of the responses of Saudi Arabia, it claims that it's actually being or interacting with these messages. However, this is the total contrary. And the works teaming and the human rights groups, they actually issue some reports on some issues which has to do with human rights. In some of the cases, Saudi Arabia has dealt with some cases with executions, and they have said these working teams have said that Saudi Arabia has actually violated the human rights. Second of all, there's how the Saudi Arabia deals with the international conventions. The Saudi Arabia has ratified 7 international conventions out of 14, which are related to human rights, general human rights, like the civil, the political, the economic, the social, the cultural. And it forbids the states usually to deal in such a way, like to clarify the idea. States are prevented from using the torture or the random detention or the execution outside the judicial procedures. And all of these states must amend their laws, amend their practices in a way that guarantee these rights stated in the agreements. Also, Saudi Arabia always in the public platforms, they try to say that they are a state which have ratified these agreements and they abide to all the articles. And they actually use this claim to state that they didn't do any violations. However, ratifying these conventions doesn't prove that they actually are abiding by them. For instance, Saudi Arabia is a member state in the torture abolition agreement since 1997. However, and despite documenting the torture, which has been using in a very broadly in Saudi Arabia. Also, Saudi Arabia is a member state in the children rights agreement, and it confirms the right to children and life and safety. However, Saudi Arabia during the 7 last years, they have executed 12 children and many others are threatened. And also within the mechanisms and the important mechanisms of United Nations is the independent expertise visit to the states in order to increase the awareness national-wise, international-wise, especially around human rights, and presenting all the ways contributing to support and promoting the United Nations work teams. However, Saudi Arabia is ignoring all the or most of the visits which are sent by the special rapporteurs. Recent-wise, also it has ignored one of the visits which has been reminded by the Saudi Arabia for 16 years. And also they were reminded that they are invited to have this visit in Saudi Arabia. However, Saudi Arabia for now hasn't accepted this. However, in 2017, Saudi Arabia has accepted 2 visits application to each of the special rapporteur, and the public media in Saudi Arabia have promoted that these visits are a solid proof that Saudi Arabia is open to development in human rights. However, after the recommendations were sent by the special rapporteur, they have ignored them, and they have prosecuted individuals who have communicated with the special rapporteur, including Isan Nukhaifi, who is a human rights activist and who is still detained, despite that his judgment period has ended. In addition to this, Saudi Arabia uses the continuous sessions of the Human Rights Council. Saudi Arabia in recent years have participated in these human rights, which are periodically held to discuss the human rights around the world, which are supposed to change, and it's supposed to be participated by the different member states and the different states around the world. Saudi Arabia would speak about its accomplishments in the human rights sector. For example, the Saudi newspapers have circulated a declaration for one of the Saudi Arabia Minister of Foreign Affairs that they have done exceptional developments, especially in human rights, especially in the rights of women and children. In the same speech, Saudi Arabia, and at the same time of this speech, Saudi Arabia detained tens of activists, women activists for human rights, and tortured them, including also minors. So where are all of these speeches prove that they are not a solid proof of what they're claiming? In addition to that, Saudi Arabia has used also human women figures and youth figures, that this is actually a solid proof also of them treating and developing the women rights. However, meanwhile, the torture, the violence against women is actually increasing, especially the women activists. And the last participation for one of the activists who was Samar Badawi, who was banned from traveling. Also, Saudi Arabia is taking advantage of this council to attack or to respond back to any state which criticize their practices. So we call for the United Nations to improve their practices on how to deal and how to apply these mechanisms, especially that those countries who ratify these conventions aren't actually going by them or abiding to them. Saudi Arabia isn't just attacking the states which are criticizing them, but they are preventing any other one to actually apply or abide to these mechanisms. And they would actually, when Saudi Arabia was once placed in the blacklist for the children rights violations due to the war on or against Yemen. And I would like to conclude here. And despite all of this money that's being spent, all of these stories being narrated by the Saudi government, and despite that it has silenced a lot of activists inside Saudi Arabia, the criticisms are actually increasing against the violations of Saudi Arabia, especially from the Commissioner of United Nations, the special reporters, whether they were public violations or silenced violations. And this proves that we should work through the Human Rights Council mechanisms of United Nations to actually come up with those facts and narrate the stories of the victims, which the Saudi Arabia is trying to cover up. And thank you. Thank you, Dua, for this speech. And right now, we shall be with to stick by the schedule, we shall be with a CAT organization. Mr. Elias Joffrey will speak about the role of France in whitewashing the Saudi regime. Elias, you have the platform.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much for this invitation, and I'm happy and delighted to be with you today. And as mentioned, I'll speak about the role France is playing in the whitewashing strategy of the Saudi regime. So as we remember, maybe a year ago, Emmanuel Macron was the first European and Western leader to break the unofficial diplomatic ban implemented against Mohammed bin Salman. And this diplomatic ban was done by the International Committee following the assassination, of course, of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi in October 2018. And he broke this ban by shaking hands and meeting with MBS during a diplomatic in December 2021. Macron defended himself by saying that it was necessary to talk to Saudi Arabia because it's the largest country in the Gulf, and to work for the stability of the region, you need to talk with them. On the other hand, he said that it doesn't not mean that we are complacent with the country, which was a direct mention to Jamal Khashoggi. But I think the truth is that France has not been the most vocal in denouncing Khashoggi assassination and the human rights situation in general in the kingdom as well. Not mentioning the ongoing war in Yemen, where Saudi Arabia is deeply involved, with the support of France too, actually. Macron waited for more than 2 months to take a position on the dreadful event and to impose sanction on the member of the Saudi kill team. He even said that Germany's decision to suspend arms transfer to Saudi Arabia following Khashoggi murder was pure demagogy, probably because he knew that this decision will complicate France's own arms exportation to Saudi Arabia, as many components of French manufactured military equipments are produced in Germany. The other truth, I think, is that France was already deeply engaged with Saudi Arabia on several major projects. Were launched under France's previous president, François Hollande, especially from 2015. And this time is interesting to notice because this coincides with the arrival of Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud as the new Saudi king, and with him, of course, the rise into power of his son, Mohammed bin Salman, also known as MBS. And at that time, the United States were also trying to improve its relation with Iran, which France was maintaining a firm position against them. And this very pleased Saudi Arabia, especially after launching its war on Yemen. And this relation actually deepened under Macron for 2017 and 2018. And just before those dates, which coincide with official visits from France to Saudi Arabia, just before this date, we have in 2016, Saudi Arabia released also its strategic framework, which is Saudi Vision 2030, which is aiming at reducing the country's dependence on its oil revenue by diversifying its economy. But we will come back to this later. It has also another purpose. But France has decided to play an important role in this project that is pushed forward by MBS. And one point of this strategy is the importance the entertainment sector is supposed to take. And this is one aspect on which France has positioned itself quite strongly. However, this pillar is also a massive whitewashing strategy of the regime to which the French government is very aware and willing to serve this purpose. In 2018, France signed an important agreement with the Saudi government to support the touristic and cultural development of Al Aula region. And this 10-long-year agreement with a dedicated office, Afalula, which is run directly by the French authorities. So this office oversees the project implementation as a whole. And Saudi Arabia has used its potential touristic attractiveness to display itself as a country open to the world, allowing a touristic visa for the first time and sponsoring many foreign influencers to visit and share their trips on social network. But this was an obvious counter narrative to the human rights situation that tends to make the headline in the Western media. Touristic and cultural partnership, French companies are getting many contracts, like for the accommodation, for the development of museums. So there's a different way the French companies are getting involved into this, and the total amount, actually, the value of French arm exportation to Saudi Arabia at some point. So in a nutshell, we can say that France is a key actor in revamping Saudi Arabia as the new high-end touristic international El Dorado, which is a very nice narrative when you want to wash up your own blood you have on the hand. And another other aspect of the entertainment whitewashing strategy, if I can say so, it's precisely the sports washing strategy that is also very important. And in 2020, the Rally Dakar motor race, managed by the French Amaury Sport Organization, sets foot on Saudi soil. I think it was one of the first major sport events to be hosted in Saudi Arabia this time. And this event is particularly, I think, interesting for the Saudi regime because it floods French international television with beautiful landscape picture. The race itself routes also take the participation to Vision 2030 sites like Al Ola, the Red Sea Project, NEOM, and so on. In this regard, we can say that the race also served in many ways as a big advertisement to visit Saudi Arabia, perfectly serving its touristic whitewashing purpose. But this will not be the last big sport event to be supported by the French government or the French companies. And if you were dissatisfied by the selection of Qatar for the Football World Cup because of the Qatar human rights record, you are going to love the Saudi Arabia bid for the 2030 World Cup. And this bid is supported by French lobbyist Maurice Gourdeau-Montagne, for example, also in charge of the lobbying for the Saudi bid to the 2030 Universal Exhibition. So many important events are here managed by some French lobbyists. And he's one of the many lobbyists and lobbying and communication companies working for the Saudi regime, which includes, like, for example, the Publicis, Avast, Image7, Still and Holt, and they're all serving Saudi whitewashing strategy in multiple fields. And I won't go into too much into detail on this because it's quite a long list. And one lobbyist in particular is very active in Saudi Arabia, and it's Richard Atias, who's chairing the Future Investment Initiative Institute, which organizes every year the Future Investment Initiative, which is called also the Davos in the Desert. And this has been in place in 2017. And it's an organization that is directly funded by the Saudi Public Investment Fund. So there's like a clear relation with the power, with the Saudi authorities. And this annual event, serves as a business vitrine to the Vision 2030. And so it's also a way to display them as a very open country for business. And also the idea is always to whitewash what is actually happening in the country. And most of these lobbying and communication companies I was referring to before have deep relations with the French political elite. Many have served in political advisor to French authorities. So these relations are very intertwined, that they serve like a go-between between the Saudi regime and the French government. And so that was just a glimpse of the main activities that are provided by the French authorities and companies to support this whitewashing strategy that is implemented by Saudi Arabia. And we already know that the result of this, especially in the field of human rights, and this year 2022 has seen execution skyrocketing again since MBS normalization, especially after this handshaking that happened a year ago by Emmanuel Macron in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah. And this time he came back in July to meet Macron, but he was only one of the many other Western leaders that were already opening their hand to him. And so we can say that in a way that the French authorities are supporting this strategy of whitewashing, and also the French companies behind it. So it's a very intertwined relation, and this is how we should probably try to shed more light on this vicious circle that is helping Saudi Arabia to get out of this situation where we should instead focus on the human rights record that is set. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
شكرا لك إلياس على هذه
Thank you, Elias, for this word speech. And we shall open the platform for anyone who wants to comment or ask any question for Elias. And also for Dua previously, if you'd like to ask any questions. Seems we don't have any questions. Probably I just have one comment about both of these speeches. The one point relating between Dua and Elias. Whenever the whitewashing would increase, the spending of money would increase. On the other hand, violence would increase. As we have mentioned before, sorry, I can't hear him anymore. Okay, so during the rule of Mohammed bin Salman and his father, all of this openness that we are actually witnessing, the neon projects, the lime, the green, great Middle East, is always faced, on the other hand, by a bigger number of executions.
علي كيف نأخذ السؤال
Now, Ali, I think we have an internet connection problem. So if anyone has any questions, would you please write your question in the Q&A chat icon? So now we shall watch the video. Thanks again for Elias, and let's watch the video together. This video is on data.
انتهينا من عرض فيديو الرسوم.
So after we have watched together the data video, now we shall be or we shall hear one of the victims' stories where Dr. Ahmed Maziad shall speak about the disappearance of his father, the Lebanese engineer Ali Maziad, in Saudi Arabia since 1 year and 4 months without any communication with his parents. You have the platform, doctor.
Hello. Good evening. First of all, I want to thank you for having me here. I'm so delighted to be here. Today I want to discuss the case of my father.
المعذرة يبدو لدينا
Excuse us, it seems that we have a technical issue with contacting Dr. Ahmed Maziad, and I hope that he rejoins us quickly.
Hello.
تمام. أهلا بعودتك.
Sorry, I got
Welcome back.
So I was saying, first of all, I just want to make sure that it is clear that I'm neither politically affiliated to any political party, nor any religious party, nor is it of my concern to discuss the political aspect of the Saudi government or whatsoever. Majorly, what happened with us it all started on August 4th, 2020. I had the last contact with my father at around 12 o'clock, 12 noon. Then, like 3 hours later, we couldn't get back to him. 24 hours later, I tried contacting some of his friends to check up on him. I thought it was a medical issue or something. After discussing the case with his neighbors, they have informed us after checking the footage of the cameras that around 6 or 7 men wearing civilian clothes showed up to his apartment at around 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And he was taken with no prior notice, nor did they inform anyone about the matter. And ever since that time, we still have no contact whatsoever with him. Up till now, I have tried contacting the Saudi embassy in Lebanon. We have contacted the police in Saudi Arabia. We have contacted the Lebanese embassy in Riyadh. We have contacted the Lebanese government, the president, the parliament, some of the parliament members, and still we have failed to reach any agreement with anyone. We still haven't got any connection with my father. Up till now, it has been around a year and 5 months. We as a family have no single idea whether my father is still alive or not. We don't even know his whereabouts. We don't know why he's been taken. I don't know. The only thing we have received, the only official information we have received, was that he was taken by the state security forces, or what they call Jihaz Amn al-Dawli. So I don't know. My father, by the way, has been living in Saudi Arabia since 2003 or 4. It has been around 18 years or 20 years. He's been working there as an engineer. None of his friends, because it's obviously no one can interfere. We've tried contacting the Interpol. We have tried contacting the Saudi government or the police, the Lebanese officials, and we still haven't reached any information regarding his whereabouts, nor we could get in contact with him. Up till now, I don't know how an engineer who has been working there for around 20 years, who never had any single problem, not with the state, not with the government, not with any of his colleagues or neighbors. I don't know how would someone like that, a 55-year-old guy, be a threat to the national security. We have no idea why, and till when will he be held as a hostage, if we could call it so. After trying to contact all of the officials we could reach, I don't know if there's anyone else we could contact. We contacted the associations of human rights. We have contacted Amnesty. Amnesty has also made a press release, but still no response. We have contacted some organizations in Geneva, but also it was all in vain. The Saudi government is not responsive, nor is willing to respond to any of the questions we are posing. But the main question remains to us as a family, as how someone living, an engineer living for 20 years there without having any single problem with anyone rather than with the state, but would be a threat to the national security. The only answer we have received so far is that he is being held captive and under investigations in accordance to a matter of national security. How would a father, a man, be a threat to national security? No one knows so far. We're here today. I'm here today just to ask some of the questions. As far as I've seen, Saudi Arabia has been keen to show us to brag about the accomplishments the guys in Saudi have made regarding sports and sports, politics, human rights. I don't know, arts. You know, the annual festival they're having in Jeddah or Riyadh. I'm not sure. Such a state. My only question is that why and how are you holding in captive a guy? And by the way, I have already this is the first time I discussed the matter publicly, but we have already said before. My dad is diabetic, and he's suffering a metastatic prostate cancer. So the guy needs medical attention, and if we leave all of this aside, I have his family. He himself has the right. If he is being accused with something, at least he should be informed. His family should be informed. He should have the right to defend himself if the guys have an accusation. It is not acceptable in any way for anyone to be held captive for more than a year and a half, with not a single information about him, nor his family being able to contact him. Frankly speaking, up till now, we don't even know if my father is alive or not. So this is my main question here. And once again, because I know how the situation is in the Gulf area generally, and in Saudi Arabia in particular, for the Lebanese citizens have been suffering of such actions of the Saudi government. Many of them, a lot of them, have been held in captive without any accusation and for a long period of time. The question is, why is that happening? Why is no one being able to ask about those people? Why is the Saudi government not responsive to any of the questions the officials are asking, the families are asking, the one held in captive himself is asking? He at least has the right to access contact to his family. He has the right to access a lawyer if he was to be accused with something, and a fair trial. This is all we were asking about since the beginning. We need a fair trial if the guys have an accusation. If not, he should be released. And this is what came in the Amnesty press release. They were asking for the immediate release the unconditional immediate release of Ali Mazyad, along with some of the other prisoners who were held captive for no obvious reasons. This is the whole matter I'm here to discuss today. And once again, we say we are in no way affiliated to any political or religious party. My dad has been an engineer since forever. He's been working there for 20 years without a single problem facing him nor the family. Some members of my family have been there. We never had any single problem. This happened out of the blue. We still have no idea whether he's alive or not. How is he being treated? Is he getting his treatment, his medical attention, the medical attention he needs? Is he getting his drugs, his treatment, his medications? And where are we going with the matter? Till when will he be held captive? And under the so-called investigation, they still say it has been a year and a half. They're still saying he is under investigation. What investigation takes a year and a half to complete? We have previously seen Saudi Arabia holding people in captive for a reason or not, but it takes up to 6 years or 6 months or 9 months for everything to show up again. Like, what's the accusation? What's the judgment they're having, the trials or whatsoever? He has been there for a year and a half without any single contact. We haven't been able to reach him, nor he could be able to reach us. This is all if we say that he is still alive. I'm very unfortunate. I'm very sorry to have to pass through this. I know my family is watching this. I'm very sorry I have to say this, but I am still not sure 100%. I don't have any chance. I don't know if my father is alive or not, rather than discussing the medical problems he has or whether he should be held or not. I don't want to take your time. I'm once again very thankful for being here. Thank you for the invitation. And if there are any questions, I'm ready to answer. Thank you.
شكرا جدا دكتور أحمد على هذه
Thank you
المداخلة.
so much, Dr. Ahmad, for your intervention, for your patience, the patience of your family, and we hope that your father will be released and also that he gets well soon. And I would like to say that many other detainees have underwent similar circumstances, from arbitrary detention and imprisonment without taking into consideration any human rights for the prisoners, as appointing an attorney, communicating with their families. Unfortunately, there are a lot of similar cases, detainees as your father.
Unfortunately, in Lebanon, I am very unfortunate to say that none of the officials, none of the parliament members, none of the government members, not even the president, not the those responsible about the state's security, not the embassy, not the Minister of Foreign Affairs have been able nor willing to get involved in the matter. Today, Ms. Najib Miati is in Saudi Arabia, and I am 100% sure if I were to call him today, he would have said, "It is none of my business." The same thing he did when he was contacted regarding the those imprisoned in UAE in Abu Dhabi. He has been asked before, and I'm very sure if he were to be contacted today, he will have the same response. Not the president, not any of the three presidents in our system, none of the delegates of the parliament, none of the members of the government were able nor willing to get involved in the matter, and we were still left with no one to contact, with no one to seek guidance or help from. And this is why we were obliged to go and speak publicly regarding about the matter. And also, by the way, the United Nations was also involved in the matter. We contacted them. Then we still haven't received any single answer or response or whatsoever, nor from the neither from them nor from the Saudi government, and definitely not the Lebanese one. I'm very unfortunate to be obliged to say that, but this is how the matters are being treated back in Lebanon, also in Saudi Arabia, and also those so-called United Nations delegations or whatever it is. I'm very sorry to say that we all know how those people run their work or whatever it is. I don't know. This is why I'm obliged to talk publicly to discuss the matter wherever and however I get the chance to. And once again, I'm very sorry for consuming up your time, guys. And thanks again for having me. Thank you.
شكرا جدا دكتور أحمد.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ahmed Mazyad.
بسبب سننتقل مباشرة.
Right now, we will head directly to the Vice President for the MENA and the FIDA, Isa Rahmoun, who shall speak how states use some mechanisms to cover up the human rights violations. Thank you for having me. I am very glad to be here with you in this conference, and frankly, we should say that in Saudi Arabia, it's a state which doesn't respect human rights and promoting the principles of human rights. This is a perspective from a faraway attorney and an activist, but let me tell you that I'm really glad to actually discover and unveil the civil community in Saudi Arabia, the Saudi brothers and sisters who are trying to organize themselves on respecting human rights and calling for human rights and the international commitments which are actually responsible before the international and the national NGOs. First of all, let me tell you that what we read or what we see in Saudi Arabia doesn't really differ from other Arab states. Probably these states with their petroleum revenues and their many wealths, which kept a lot of poor people and they made them poor. Especially, they made them really busy from asking their rights and the dignity for human rights, children rights, women rights, the right to gather, the right to convene. I believe that the states around the world, whether they were European or American states or great states as they usually use, we can find how they structure their institutions and their people to have an economic luxury, to reach a political welfare and democracy which keeps the Arab states. I'm sorry, I can't hear him anymore.
الاتحاد الأوروبي أنتم تعلمون
So
مثلا
as for the European Union, as you all know, there is an agreement between the European Union and some states of Northern Africa on the economy, the trade, the political aspects, and the good neighboring. However, the other implications or the second article of this agreement states that this agreements or conventions between the European Union and the Northern African countries won't be executed unless democracy and human rights were respected. This article, of course, isn't just respected by the European Union, in addition to the massive amounts of money which are sent by the Saudi Arabia, Egypt, from all the Arab states to the Swiss banks, to the French banks, or the English banks. This is a very tough issue with the people of these Arab states. So as I've heard from the speakers, and they are very thankful for their activism and their faith in this issue. So we have the torture issue. We can find it in all the Arab states. Also, the execution. There are some countries which would use the execution in a vast way, and other countries would use the execution. They would issue the execution and they won't actually implement it. And also we have the coercive disappearance, which is against human rights. So all the Arab states, including Morocco, Algeria, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the different Arab states, actually suffer this problem. The arbitrary detention, the unjust judicial trials, the women human rights issue. We have all of these issues in all the Arab states. So let's stop here to say that we are all equal in these problems that we are facing. Before these Arab rule, we are equal. So let's ask this question. These tyrant rules, which are centralized, which are solidified today, although I don't wish that this is the case, probably that the civil society for this Arab state isn't cooperating altogether. They are not doing enough advocacy. They are not tackling the issues which are really violating the human rights. They are not cooperating in these issues together. Probably Amnesty International or FIDA or the different NGOs, through enrolling in them, cooperating with them, advocacy before the United Nations Council, the European Union, and also the European Union Council, the European Parliament, in addition to the European states, which we can see when we see that France is among the main funding agents for Saudi Arabia for the arms. Also, we can notice that in Algeria as for Russia, similar-wise for Morocco as for the USA. And also we have this Lebanon when it comes to France. So if we worked all together, we cooperated all together to advocate before the international agencies, which I have previously mentioned, or before the states, why don't we work side by side all together and unified campaigns of advocacy between Lebanon, Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco, and other states, because at the end, the international opinion must know that the peoples of these countries are actually being treated unjustly, and there are no legal mechanism which allows the individual to, or even to communities and their own, to live in dignity, safely, and in good welfare, because welfare isn't just about money. It's about thoughts, the freedom, and also access to justice. So why don't we think about a unified campaign for the Arab states to say here, say before the European states or USA, or what they are referred to as democratic states, so that you're no much democratic than these Arab states rules. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Isa Rahmoun. And I would like to say that you are right with what has to do with the similarity of the rules, the regimes, the Arab regimes which you have referred to.
تمارس نفس الممارسات من تعذيب وإعدام
The
وإخفاء.
different regimes which are doing arbitrary detentions, torture, coercive disappearance, they are taught from the same book, from the same teacher. So welcome back. So did you hear my question or not? No, I didn't hear your question. So you have mentioned that there is similarity in how the regimes are treating their people, and execution, torture, coercive disappearance. So are these regimes being taught from the same book to torture their people? Were they taught by the same teacher, as they are adopting the same way in dealing with their people? Did they read from the same book? I don't think that the holy books have taught them all of this hatred, all of this dislike, all of this neglection for human rights. I think that all religions, and I truly believe in that, all religions are religions of peace, of love, of dignity. So when we go to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, we can also find another religion, which is a human religion. But what I'd like to highlight here, that these regimes at the end, they are the facade of the European and the foreign states, and for what they refer to themselves as democratic states, because the actually cooperation, the under cooperation or unveiled cooperation of the UN agencies of these states with such regimes, these regimes know how to misuse the economic factor and how to mortgage their own communities and the human being in themselves, the woman, which makes the welfare of the communities of the people in the northern part of the world more free and more living in welfare than those living in the southern part of the world.
اختفى أمين. إن شاء الله.
Thank you so much. I hope that he didn't disappear coercively, but willingly, probably by the will of the internet connection here. Thank you so much for this very worthy intervention. So I'm gonna take from here until Amin comes back. Now we shall be with Zaki Sarah from Reprieve, who is a researcher, investigator, caseworker, who shall speak about the execution and the whitewashing in it. Zaki, you have the platform.
Thank you very much, Dara, and thank you, ASOHR, for inviting me to take part in this very important discussion. So I'll speak about Saudi Arabia and how they've been using lies and deception to gaslight the international community with promises of reforms. So whilst at the same time of these lies, the kingdom's use of the death penalty continues to break international law without regard. And firstly, as just a preliminary point that's important to address, Saudi Arabia is an absolute monarchy. There are no democratically elected officials that can hold the rulers to account. Therefore, when we're talking about the kingdom's use of the death penalty and the constant disregard of international law, that responsibility rests squarely with the king and crown prince. They are responsible. So there have been remarks by supporters of the regime that Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, is pushing for reforms, but there are these hardline judiciary members that are impeding the progress, and they are responsible in some way for the extreme repression in the country. So this is simply false. If Mohammed bin Salman was serious about reforms, there would be real reforms. So in an interview to the Time magazine in 2018, Mohammed bin Salman made a commitment that Saudi Arabia was restricting their use of the death penalty, and in particular for non-lethal offenses. The next year, 2019, Saudi Arabia executed a record high of 187 individuals, including a mass execution of 37 men. And just this year, on the 3rd of March, 2022, Mohammed bin Salman gave an interview to the Atlantic where he said, regarding the death penalty, we're getting rid of it in its entirety. And he goes on to say that the only two places where the death penalty will still be permissible would be in the places where it's stipulated in the Quran. So cases of murder or when, quote, someone threatens the lives of many people. And only 9 days later, Saudi Arabia carried out the largest mass execution in its history, executing 81 men in one day. And so over 50% of those executed were executed for their participation in pro-democracy protests, and over 70% were executed for non-lethal offenses. So when we're looking at the reforms, and then we see what is being said and the reality, it's very clear that these are two completely different things. And it shows that when Mohammed bin Salman and the Saudi state repeatedly make these promises of reform and change, they can't be trusted. And the death penalty for child defendants is no different. It follows the same pattern of promise and then deceit and executions. So the juvenile law was announced in 2018, and the Saudi authorities announced that these reforms would abolish the use of the death penalty for child defendants. And Article 16 of the juvenile law, if you were to look at it, it includes a caveat which says that the death penalty may still be used for child defendants for certain categories of offenses. And then in 2020, the royal decree was announced. And it was said that it will expand the scope of the juvenile law. But the full text of the royal decree was never published. The following year, Awad al-Awad, the head of the Saudi Human Rights Commission, addressed the UN Human Rights Council with the clear, categorical commitment that Saudi Arabia have abolished the use of the death penalty for child defendants without any caveats. This turned out to be a lie, because because the same year, Mustafa al-Darwish was executed in June of 2021 for protest-related offences when he was a child. And there are still child defendants at risk of execution now. But due to the lack of transparency in Saudi Arabia, there's no way to truly know how many individuals are at risk of execution, unfortunately. But one of those at risk is Abdullah al-Huwaiti, who was only 14 years old when he was taken from his family home, tortured into confessing to a crime he could not have committed, and he was sentenced to death. And so now moving on, the pattern of broken promises is also evident when examining the death penalty for drug offences. So in January last year, 2021, the Saudi Human Rights Commission announced in a tweet that the death penalty moratorium was in place for individuals convicted of drug offences. And for a while, there were no executions for drug offences, but there was no attempt by the kingdom to legalise the moratorium in any way. But this all changed a few weeks ago. And since the 10th of November of this year, Saudi Arabia has executed 20 individuals for drug offences. So there was no announcement or justification for the authorities' U-turn. And worryingly, none of the 20 that were executed were known to civil society organizations that monitor the death penalty in Saudi Arabia, which means they were arrested, tried, sentenced, and executed in secrecy. So our client, Hassan Abu Khair, a Jordanian national, has a finalized death sentence and is at risk of imminent execution for alleged drug smuggling. He was tortured for 12 days at the time of his arrest. He never had a lawyer throughout the entirety of his proceedings. And Hassan was recently informed that he'll be moved to a death cell, which means that his execution could happen at any time without warning. So as much as the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, likes to talk about reforms and change, we must focus on the reality. The Saudi PR machine will whitewash their grave abuses with Formula One and golf events, or through the purchase of football clubs like Newcastle United. But we know this whitewashing is to distract from the reality, and the PR machine continues to lie because they simply cannot defend the indefensible. As there are promises that Saudi Arabia is becoming more tolerant, individuals who exercise their freedom of expression, such as Salman al-Auda and Hassan al-Maliki, are at risk of the death penalty. As there are promises that the death penalty for child defendants has been abolished, child defendants such as Abdullah al-Huwaiti are at risk of execution. And finally, despite their promise of death penalty moratorium for drug offences, Hassan Abu Khair could be executed at any time without any warning. So I think that's all from me. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer.
شكرا لزكي صراف.
Thank you so much, Zaki Sarraf from Reprieve. And excuse me for the technical issue. So if anyone has any question to Zaki, you may ask. So now we would see together a video on the drugs issues or cases. A short video, let's see it together.
والآن لدينا الباحث.
Now we shall be with the academic researcher Zena Isa, who shall speak about the investment and funds and their role in whitewashing the human rights violations in the Saudi context. You have the platform, Zena.
Can you hear me and see me? Okay. Okay, so thank you for inviting me to this event. It's been really upsetting hearing some of the kind of first-hand testimonials from Ahmed and hearing about some of the latest developments in the human rights landscape in Saudi Arabia from Zeki. My contribution here today is a bit different. It's a bit broader. So I'm contributing today as a PhD researcher from the University of Bath. And the focus of my research is around the area of corporate social responsibility. So really, I look at the intersection of business and society. So I'm not really going to talk about like a specific violation as such, but I'm going to talk more holistically about the role of business and kind of how it intersects with issues such as whitewashing. So really, I don't think it's possible to have a conversation about things such as whitewashing without bringing in business into that conversation. So one of the kind of key areas of research that I've been looking at is around the role of multinational and foreign companies who operate in Saudi Arabia or do business with the Saudi government. Because there's a kind of a recognition in the literature that firms can play a political role and enact political change. So I'm really interested in that dynamic in terms of the context of Saudi Arabia, in terms of the kind of human rights and democracy angle. And I understand that there is a frustration across the human rights community that many of the mechanisms that we use to address human rights concerns, such as the UN mechanisms or asking other states to intervene, can be very slow, and that comes with it a whole host of frustrations. So the way we see it is that firms or businesses can potentially be a leverage point for potentially civil society to activate to help enact some kind of positive change around the human rights landscape in Saudi Arabia. And that really comes from the idea that foreign direct investment, or FDI, is part of Vision 2030, and it's an integral part of MBS's plan, his blueprint for the future. So really, we see that firms can hold a very, very influential position in terms of trying to ask for change or initiate change even. So really my research is to explore that dynamic in the Saudi context, and I'm in the process of interviews right now and I've interviewed like many civil society organizations, and I'm going to interview lots of corporations after the new year that operate or do business in Saudi Arabia with their headquarters. So currently kind of my research is still in the kind of data collection phase. So I don't really have like any kind of conclusive findings to report here, but I do have some insights that might be useful or interesting. So I think one of the key insights that comes across is that when we talk about business, we can't really just talk about certain sectors of business. And I noticed there is a lot of focus on things, on kind of areas such as public relations companies or consulting firms, and rightly so, because they do have they directly feed into this idea of whitewashing or reputation laundering. And as well, there's a big focus on the sporting associations and kind of more individual level businesses, such as like music artists, influencers, athletes. But I think one thing I would say is that this idea of business, playing a political role is far more extensive than that, because obviously those types of businesses that I just mentioned, they directly feed in to issues such as whitewashing, either by actually helping the Saudi state to cover up for its violations, or by participating in events which have been designed to push a certain narrative that Saudi is modern, Saudi is whatever. But there are also a whole other host of businesses that should be included in this idea of targeting business with the view for political change. So in particular for Saudi Arabia, that could come as firms that are involved in mega projects that are kind of orchestrated by the Saudi state, such as NEOM. So obviously NEOM has been associated with forced displacement of local tribes, of the killing of activists, and firms that are investing or thinking about investing in those kind of mega projects should be targeted by civil society organizations. And actually there are human rights risks for any firm that might want to set up in Saudi Arabia, because there's always the risk that the firm's kind of business operations can become sites of violations. For example, we saw when Mohammed bin Salman was doing his corruption drive, he used the Ritz-Carlton as the site of torture for many of the people that he rounded up. And there's also big tech, companies such as Google, that has become a really emerging theme so far. Google's considering setting up a data center in Saudi Arabia, and that obviously could have major implications for human rights defenders and for activists and their privacy and their data. So really, I mean, most of these multinationals or foreign firms, they are set up in headquarters, and their headquarters are in countries that are democratic countries. So they, there is a big onus on them to ensure that, democratic ideals are not violated when they decide to set up in authoritarian states. And obviously the UN guiding principles, they say that firms must mitigate or must, conduct their due diligence for human rights risks. But currently what I've seen is that there is a big gap right now in my research so far between civil society organizations and firms. And that is an area potentially that needs to be further explored by civil society organizations. And that's not to take away from the fact that the state, the Saudi state, is the perpetrator of these violations, but firms can be enablers of that, or firms can also be in a position to contest some of those violations. So this is potentially an area that could be kind of an avenue of exploration. So it's more just to raise the fact that business is an actor, an influential actor, and particularly as Saudi Arabia moves towards a kind of really focusing on their on developing their market and the economy, we find that business becomes a really, really important actor, a market-based actor that potentially civil society organizations should think about in terms of targeting and think about in terms of, advocacy. And what I would say, just to end there, is that that is not an easy task, because one thing that I've kind of is becoming clear as part of my research is that this is a challenging area for civil society organizations, because they're used to speaking to state actors. They don't know how to talk to business. Business needs a different type of skill set. It needs a different repertoire of approaches. So that might be a potential area of development that might need to be addressed if this is an area that is civil society organizations are willing to explore. But that's it from me. Thank you very much.
شكرا لك زينة.
Thank you so much, Zena. And as you have spoken about the challenges, there is a question from the audience. To what extent the NGOs and the campaigns can actually face the whitewashing attempts of Saudi Arabia?
I got half of it, but I didn't get the other half.
to what extent, to what extent can the NGOs and the campaigns conducted by the NGOs to face the Saudi attempts in whitewashing their image?
I'm waiting for the translation.
If I may say this, so the question is, up to what extent campaigns can stop the Saudi authorities from benefiting from whitewashing and so on. So how important is the effectiveness of campaigns on exposing Saudi whitewashing?
So I don't actually think I'm the expert in answering that right now. I think that the NGOs that are actually delivering these campaigns, they can talk about the effectiveness. This is obviously one of the areas of my research, but I'm still in data collection phase, so it's not something that I could potentially answer on fully. But what I would say is that from the NGOs that I've already spoken to, the outcomes have been variable. Some have had very good kind of reception, and others have struggled to get engagement from business or from other actors. So it has been variable. Thank you.
شكرا. أيضا يوجد
Thank you. Also, there is a question to Zaki. So Zaki, do you think that the campaigns by Saudi Arabia for whitewashing actually help them go back to more executions?
Yes, I definitely think so, because I think Mohammed bin Salman, he is curating a certain type of Saudi Arabia, a type of Saudi Arabia where it's seen as this type of utopia without any issues, and trying to get further away from the image of the regime that murdered Jamal Khashoggi, the regime that has mass executions. And so the whitewashing efforts by the state is purposeful. They do it to distract away from the negative attention. And when people are distracted from the negative attention, that's when we see more repression in the state. So where individuals are not speaking out about the violations, that's where we see Saudi Arabia executes more. So when world leaders in the international community, they accept Mohammed bin Salman's reformist agenda, and they believe that he is going towards reforms and he genuinely cares about reforms, that gives Mohammed bin Salman the license to carry on executing. I mean, we saw after the mass execution, the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson going there. And whilst Boris was there were 3 more executions, and there were 16 more executions in the 11 days following the mass execution. So this is what happens when the state whitewashes. People, world leaders would accept the whitewashing and would fall for the tricks and the deception. And then it gives Saudi Arabia the impunity to carry on doing what they planned on from the beginning. So I think it is a very successful tactic, and it's important that the distraction is exposed and the whitewashing is mentioned by civil society, as we're speaking about today.
Thank you, Zaki. So there's one more question for Zena, which is similar to what Zaki was asked. Did you notice in your research any successful attempt in stopping some of the works of a company because or due to the violations of human rights?
Yes, is the answer to that. But because I'm in data collection phase, I can't give a lot of information right now until I get the necessary permissions. But the answer is yes, to a certain degree.
شكرا زينة.
Thank you so much, Zena. This is an encouraging result.
شكرا لك زينة.
So thank you, Zena. And Zaki, now we shall be with
لدينا بعد زينة أحمد
Mr. Ahmed
البحريني
Al-Wadai from Bird Bahraini Institute. Ahmed Al-Wadai will participate on the Saudi political efforts using the British Parliament to cover up their abuses and violations. Good evening, and thank you for having me and for giving me the opportunity to participate. I will speak on the not only the British Parliament attempts, but also will focus on how Saudi Arabia uses the sports whitewashing in order to whitewash its violations and abuses. Also, I will speak about how some politicians were threatened and blackmailed, and also human rights organizations. I will speak first about, according to me, it was the worst event in this year. In 12 March, when Saudi Arabia had executed 81 persons, many of them were from the eastern region. Execution was because they have protested against the royal family. This was a black, dark day in the history of Saudi Arabia. This is a historical day because in one day, 81 persons were actually executed. It's the worst day ever in the executions history. What I want to say here, how would such a day and what are the political consequences after this day? First of all, that Boris Johnson has visited Saudi Arabia. It happened after a few days from this execution. Despite there were pressures by the British media from some member of parliament who asked Boris Johnson to not go for this visit. This is a clear message to Mohammed bin Salman and to the royal family that UK can actually ignore such vicious violations for human rights, even though they were massive executions. For all, and after that, the visit happens, and also the war in Ukraine and the petroleum prices were encouraging for the Boris Johnson to not retreat from doing this visit in order to decrease the price of the petroleum. And the UK station is far more important than any other violations which were done by Saudi Arabia. Also, after days of this, the Formula One also a race happened in Saudi Arabia. First of all, it happened in Bahrain. Then the next phase was in Saudi Arabia. Also, this was a very curious date because they were clearly called for stopping this race because only 2 weeks have passed from executing 81 persons. And there was a very clear question to the Formula One management, CEO Stefano. They were questioned by journalists on how would you do such a race, although your business partner has committed such a crime. And the response was very ridiculous, actually. And this is what Saudi hopes, that the aim behind having this Formula One race is giving more legitimacy to the ruler and to its crimes, and show that Saudi Arabia is more open because it's the most important cars race being held in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah city. This is the image which Saudi government wanted to transfer to the people. But what happened was the contrary. The world champion for 7 times in Formula One, Lewis Hamilton, criticized severely Saudi Arabia when he was asked by the journalists, was Formula One administration decision to have the race held in Saudi Arabia right? Hamilton said, I don't feel comfortable here. And I can't say that I feel comfortable, but unfortunately, it's not my decision. And sports took this decision on behalf of us. So Saudi Arabia actually had a very vicious media campaign which were covering the Formula One race. I believe that they were amongst the strongest media campaigns because the violations were really bold. And at the same time, the war against Yemen was still going on. And this was also ridiculous. How can the Formula One administration itself defend its decision in taking or in holding this race in Saudi Arabia, while Saudi Arabia executed 81 persons, war in Yemen was still on, and at the same time, the Formula One administration has actually withdrawn from Russia. So, how can this happen? At the same time, despite that, Saudi Arabia is waging a war against Yemen. The Formula One would actually ignore this fact and approves that Saudi hosts this event. So it becomes very clear here how Western hypocrisy and the multiple standards, dual standards, not only by the Western states and who spoke a lot about human rights standards, but when it comes for real and when the decision has to be taken against states, which they consider as allies, then all of these crimes committed by these rulers can be ignored as if nothing happened. This is point 1. Point 2, in the UK, and how Saudi Arabia purchased Castle United Football Club, 1 million sterling pound. So here's comes our role, or the important point here for Saudi Arabia. How can Saudi Arabia be a part of the most important sports events, Premier League in UK? Premier League is known as one of the most important contests and protests, not protests, events. Millions of people actually watch this event. How can Saudi Arabia purchase football clubs with such amounts, and then they can decide how the ads for this football club can take control over it? So here we should speak that how these states can through their money actually purchase other states, other acquaintances, and when challenged by money, all of these standards which would actually fail. So it's not just about doing deals public-wise. Here we shall speak about the politicians' role. I'll go back to your first question, how Saudi Arabia deals with members of parliament in the UK. It uses the weapon of money and arms. Philip Hammond was the Minister of Treasury in UK in Theresa May regime. So he is considered as the second man in the state. Saudi Arabia managed in less than 2 years was able to purchase the acquaintance of Philip Hammond and to be as one of their advisors. He is an official advisor of Saudi government with a few millions and not billions. A committee actually was held because Philip Hammond was a ministry in a very sensitive position. So before starting or initiating any business, he is a member of Lords Council right now and not the House of Parliament. But the Saudi Arabia was able to purchase his acquaintance with a few millions. We always heard how can Gulf countries were able to purchase advisors or ambassadors who used to work at their country, like employees for them. So here we know the previous Bahraini American ambassador in Bahrain. So as for USA, anyone who works in lobbying, so they must declare that they must declare their financial accounts. It appeared that this ambassador is working officially for the Saudi government for a certain salary. So when we speak about these values, these standards, we actually laugh at ourselves. They were able to purchase the sports, the politicians with money. And this is the very difficult reality that we are actually tackling. We should know that the tools, these are the tools used by the other part. We should have further stronger tools. We want to thank Reprieve this year and other NGOs because they played a very big role in unveiling the violations during the period of Formula One, and they managed to turn the happiness of Saudi Arabia into a media nightmare. And I hope that similar steps would be taken, especially the role of the European Saudi organization in unveiling the number of executed persons, during the year, the types of their cases, and the impact of the decisions in Geneva and agencies. I want to conclude here. Probably Saudi Arabia have billions and have a lot of money to buy a lot of acquaintances, but the voice of right is the strongest. No matter what it purchased, the voice of truth is the strongest. If the will of the people are there to challenge these regimes, we will see this regime fall. We saw how Mohammed bin Salman has failed before Jamal Khashoggi or before Jane Hadlul, who was forced to set her free. These are actually triumphs. So who would say that the international advocacy or pressure doesn't have an impact? I would tell you, look at the people who were set free a year ago, months ago. They are a living witness that pressuring these regimes can actually lead us to reach a result. Please don't give up your tools. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Ahmed. There is a question from the audience here. Probably your final word answered this question, but I'm going to pose it anyway. Do you think that the peoples around the world can contribute to stop the sports whitewashing as Formula One or Mondial? Actually, I have a direct experience in this, and I want to speak about my experience in Bahrain in the Formula One race. This year, before Formula One launched, we tried to communicate with the administration of Formula One as for the Bahrain race, and we have tackled many points amongst the sports hypocrisy. We wanted them to clarify why would you withdraw the race from Russia but hold it in Saudi Arabia and keep it in Bahrain, although they are states which are waging war against Yemen. Because if you are saying that you won't hold it in a state which is waging war against another state, we posed this question to them. And of course, we didn't have a response. But we received a letter from one of the political prisoners to Lewis Hamilton. Anyone who would follow Lewis Hamilton, he is the most famous in Formula One because he is the legendary champion. He has won it for 7 times, the title. So the letter came from prisoners, a political prisoner in Bahrain. He wrote it to Lewis Hamilton telling him, we started because of your solidarity attitude with us in Bahrain. We started watching Formula One in Bahrain, and we wrote the name Sir Lewis on our prisoner's uniform, or write the number of his car, 44. The Guardian newspaper actually mentioned this, that prisoners, according to the attitude, solidarity of Lewis with prisoners in Bahrain, the same journalist actually asked Hamilton about this letter, about the political prisoners letter. He said, yes, I did hear it. I never imagined in my life, in a million years, that as a person, I would have such an influence on such people. So also his response was in solidarity. So actually, I believe that the Bahrain race was also a nightmare media campaign, because the world champion was in solidarity with the prisoners and not whitewashing to the host country. And the Formula One administration actually was faced severely by its dual standards. And when we asked how, if the victims can play a role in stopping this, yes. Now we are in the process of a legal complaint against Formula One. A part of them were actually victims of torture in Bahrain. So we started with this legal proceeding complaint against the Formula One, and we hope that these movements or actions would have positive impacts. I hope that I answered this. Yes, you did, and in a fruitful answer. So it's not expected that Lewis to have this communication with the prisoners, or the prisoners to have the communication with Lewis from different or 2 separate roles, from a person who is set free and from other persons who are in the prison. So if anyone has any more question or comment from the speakers or an intervention, I would like to thank Mr. Ahmad for this detailed intervention, which is really encouraging. Thank you so much. It seems there's no comments or questions, but I have questions myself, since we still have a few minutes left. And since Isa came back to us, I will ask him a question here. So what's the role of the French people in pressuring to stop the whitewashing support as visits and others? Of course, this is a very good question. We should remind or recall that we should always differentiate between the peoples of these states and the regimes. Of course, I'm an asylum seeker in France since 8 months. After a lot of harassments, I discovered that the French civil society, the Human Rights Committee in France, as well as the Moroccan, Tunisian, or Libyan or Algerian NGOs in France, that there is much done as networks, communication networks, work networks, and also the French syndicates always tackle such issues, and they exercise pressure on the states which don't respect and violate human rights. So probably we should not answer here in spontaneous ways. We should differentiate here between the communities and the regimes ruling these communities. And I would like to thank you for the job that you are doing, for the work that you are doing. And I think that you should get more close in contact with the communities, with the civil societies in France, in Belgium, and Germany, in the UK, because the group work is actually NGOs' work. It's not about only documenting the violations or declarations or the campaigns which being held before the UN agencies or any governmental authorities. We should all work together in solidarity with the civil society communities in European states. It's one of the main keys that we should find in the near or far future. Thank you so much for your answer. Also, I have another question for you. It's said that Mohammed bin Salman will have a visit to Algeria. Since you're an opponent and a refugee, probably you have information how the civil society in Algeria reacts to such a visit. Let me tell you this thing, that in Algeria, there is a civil society, a free civil society, and another civil society which follows the regime. So the other civil society, which actually follows this regime and is considered like the social base for the regime, probably they would welcome happily this visit of Mohammed Salman to Algeria, especially that Mohammed bin Salman didn't attend the Arab summit, which was held in Algeria. The fact that he didn't come to this summit is one of the indicators that, first of all, he doesn't share the Algerian regime for the Algeria issue, for the Algeria desert or Nazario, or the Palestinian issue. So probably before Algeria was named as the capital of Saudis. However, before Algeria was named as the capital of revolutionists, and today it's the capital of the dictators. So Mohammed bin Salman visiting Algeria doesn't change anything about the reality of the human rights or the civil societies in Algeria for both countries. Let's recall that in Algeria there is a movement or several movements who were against holding the Arab summits in Algeria. Why? Because Algeria isn't an Arab state. It's an Amazighi state, and every belonging based upon race is imaginary, and it doesn't have a realistic or economic or human existence at the same time. So the whole welfare of communities is based on democracy and human rights. So that's why we see that the visit of Mohammed bin Salman, as for the Algerian community in general and the civil society, the free civil society, isn't welcomed. Probably I would like to add here that Algeria has a heritage of 1 million martyr isn't related to a language. All the governments and regimes would fall and rise, but the people would stay. Let's remind also and recall that the 1 million martyr, they include martyrs from different states: Morocco, Libya, Iraq, Colombia, France. So the revolution of Algeria wasn't a revolution of Algeria itself only, but a revolution of different peoples against a tyrant. So this is what you have actually proven in your speech with concerning the solidarity of different people together. Thank you, Isa. So I have a question here for Dua. So it's noted that the Saudi activists are rare or not really existing in the UN headquarters or agencies. How can we understand that, despite that the activists from other countries are many? I think I spoke quickly about this in my intervention. In fact, Saudi Arabia prevents this through banning their travel detention, or actually the last participation inside the UN Council was in 2014 for Samar Batawi, and when she returned back to Saudi Arabia, she was banned from travel. Also, Lujain Al-Hadwoul was participating in the meetings discrimination against women in Geneva, and when she returned back to Saudi Arabia, also she was detained. So in one way or another, Saudi Arabia is telling those activists, you cannot participate in such events. Even the activism inside Saudi Arabia, human rights activists, the NGOs are almost rare. They are either banned from travel or from public speaking or from speaking up their opinion. They mainly depend on the activists who are outside Saudi Arabia to transfer or raise the voice of those. They have the ability to speak up more, to tell what's really going on, because Saudi Arabia is trying to silence completely the civil society in Saudi Arabia. Thank you, Dua. A similar question that it's trying to silencing completely the internal civil society. So in addition to these attempts, what are the challenges facing the Saudi NGOs to actually transferring the reality or what's going in reality? This is what I actually mentioned. It's very difficult to reach the resources because anyone who can communicate with NGOs is threatened or at risk of being detained, of being accused. Even communicating with NGOs is considered a charge in itself. So it's a big challenge to reach data. Lately, the space is being more restricted for the activists, and reaching such information is more difficult, and fear of being revenged at So the internal is really afraid of being or communicating with the activists outside. So fearing for the activists inside is one of the main challenges. And documenting the information, also trying to raise the voice within the whitewashing, the manipulating, also because the government is trying to charge them, to detain them, to criminalize their activism. And also the speeches their speeches before the UN agencies, they say, we do not detain any human rights defenders. In fact, we don't know what the defenders mean. The person has the right to express their opinion. So all of these and much more keeps us before a lot of challenges, as Mr. Ahmed mentioned, as Mr. Isa, and other interventions. No matter what Saudi government, silence can't be subdued, because the victim's voice shall conquer, because we should always find new ways to reach these victims, to document these violations and publish them through media, human rights council, diplomats, states, which may have an influence, communities, and the international and universal opinion, who should be well aware of what's going on. So thank you, Dua. It's very important to know what is really going on, and raising the voice is, in fact, as Mr. Ahmed mentioned, no matter how much money they spend, and I shall interrelate this to what Isa said, money isn't everything, thought and freedom, and as Ahmed Al-Widai has mentioned, truth can't be covered. And as you mentioned in your speech also, we should raise the voice of truth, the voice of the detainees and the victims. Thank you, all of you, for your interventions, the speakers, and the family of the victims. We reach to the end of this day in hopes to have you with us tomorrow also, unless someone wants to have a last say. Okay, so I will stop here. Excuse me, but probably I wouldn't be able to be tomorrow, because we have a meeting with the Human Rights Committee in France and the Tunisia and Morocco Committee, within the frame of the 10th of December for Universal Day or International Day of Human Rights. So I would like to excuse you and your colleagues for not attending tomorrow. Best of luck for you tomorrow also. So Zaki, do you have any comment or intervention? No? Okay. So does anyone else have any other comments? So here we come to a wrap. Thank you so much. And to whoever is being able to attend tomorrow, we hope to see all of you. Good luck. Good evening.